And welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host with Jeff. I'm your host Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin, and the good doctor. We've talked about it on the show. Bernie and others. The Ben and Jerry's gang. Um, there may be something that's increasingly getting into the water, not only in Vermont but in the rest of the country, and that's called being a self-hating Jew. Chucky Schumer. He always proclaims. I think Schumer means like protector of the Jews, and yet, right at the time where Israel's fighting for its life, this piece of shit, this political piece of shit hack, tries to interfere in Israeli politics. And guess what? It's effing backfired because uh, hundreds of Jewish leaders and groups have formally issued rebukes to Schumer's interference. Your thoughts?
Yeah,
And he's always been a despicable piece of shit anyway. Go ahead.
it could not have backfired on him any more than it has. Aside from the rebukes that are coming for him, Netanyahu's popularity in Israel actually grew because made his comments, because there is the appearance that Biden is backing away from Israel.
Which
They've
he is.
they're very obviously trying to kowtow to the far left of the party because they're terrified they're going to lose their jobs. Well, guess what? They're losing the Jewish vote. They're wrong on every count of this. And you cannot seek political cover for something like this. You are either on the side of right or you are on the side of wrong. In this case, if you are supporting Israel's right to defend itself, right to not fear Hamas, and right to strike back and eliminate the threat to their existence, you are in the right. If you are trying to kowtow to any pro Palestinian group, any left wing wacko that thinks Israel is the problem, you are in the wrong. It is as simple as that. There is no political cover for it.
I would agree, more than agree, Dr. Eric E. Lopkin, but it also goes beyond that. Biden, yes, he's just a political hack. He's been that way for 50 years. But Schumer is Jewish. And how despicable, how disgusting. You would actually put the possible elimination of a Jewish country, Judaism overall, and you essentially would put your political and your party's political fortunes ahead of your own people. That to me, his ass should be thrown out of the Senate. I'm glad that he did that because the Jews, a majority of them, were leaving the Democratic Party in New York, not in Texas, in New York. And this piece of shit doing that just accelerates the process. I think he's a despicable piece of shit. And I hope that you are correct, Dr. Eric E. Lopkin. And I hope the repercussions are enormous, both personally and politically. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. How does that sound?
Yeah, it is absolutely inconceivable that he would even make the comments, even forgetting the self hating Jew aspect of it.
Which he is.
He is he is attempting he is attempting to influence foreign elections. Now I know it's commonplace for our government officials to try to influence foreign
Not when a
elections,
country's
but
fighting for its life.
right, but the Democrats in particular are yelling about foreign interference in our election, and how dare anybody try to influence our people, and yet they're doing the exact same thing to an ally, no less, who is fighting for its very existence. You don't
There you
get
go. In the
lower than that.
exactly wrong time. Yes, he is. It shows him for the pond scum he is. And Dr. Lopkin, and I'm sure our listeners, what is the end result of this for Chucky the piece of shit? Are there repercussions,
I
yes or no?
I don't know if there are going to be repercussions. I'm not sure if he is running for reelection this year. Uh,
I'm sure he is.
well, it's Senate. It's every 6 years, so I'm not
Yeah, I know.
sure.
I got you. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's up this year. If he's not up this year, honestly, people have such short attention spans. By the time he is up for reelection, I don't think they'll make a big deal of it. If it is this year, I think certainly that is going to affect the ticket, if not him personally. So I think you're going to see a much larger Trump turnout than you would have otherwise because the Jewish people have had it. The African American people have had it. The Hispanic people have had it with all of the lies and all of the promises that the Democrats have broken. So I think you are going to see a much lower Democratic turnout this November than the Democrats are counting on. Now, is that going to affect Schumer? I don't know. It depends on who the Republicans are going to run against him. But I think it definitely will affect congressional races, local races. I think people are going to have to scramble because this son of a shot his mouth off.
Well, unfortunately, the piece of shit is not up for reelection. But another piece of shit that is and is in the safe category is Chris the moron Murphy, who the boy genius said that Biden's handling of the pullout in Afghanistan was done correctly and the repercussions were inevitable. How is a moron? Okay, Connecticut's supposed to be the genius state, right? Everyone goes to college and everyone's a genius and everything. How did this absolute moron gets into the Senate is beyond me. He is a moron. He's the one who basically, him and Bernie, won a 4-day work week because he thinks it would be better for us socially. Uh, Economically, it might be a friggin' disaster, but the boy genius never worked a day in his life anyway, just just like Bernie.
Yeah, he is in office because, to steal a line from Nancy Pelosi, she was talking about AOC's district, but the same thing applies to Connecticut. You could put a D on a coffee cup and it would win. And that needs to change. People need to pay attention to what these folks are doing. And Chris Murphy is actually particularly disgusting because after he was elected, now I have a lot of politically active friends on both sides of the aisle. And one of my Democratic friends was at a party with Chris Murphy and happened to hear him say that now that he's in the Senate, he doesn't have to do anything because there's no way anybody's going to vote him out.
Unfortunately, you are correct, and we are stuck with what we have. Although Blumenthal didn't really all do that well 2 years ago, but that's another issue. Yeah, so it's interesting. But also, obviously, she's not in the Senate. But AOC is increasingly, the rock star is getting a lot of shit in her own district. Many compare it to a third world shithole. She'll win, but it ain't going to be a smooth path. That is my prediction,
It's
Dr.
not
Lopkin.
it's not going to be smooth, and it may be her final election because
Oh,
not only the Republicans putting someone up in the general, but the Democrats, I believe, will hit her hard in the primaries from now on because her areas of Jackson Heights and the surrounding areas have become a third world country. They are overrun.
shithole.
They're overrun with migrants. There is garbage everywhere. It looks like San Francisco.
Prostitution.
It looks like San Francisco. You've got prostitutes soliciting everybody, including teenagers. You have illegal immigrants setting up illegal stands on the street selling stolen merchandise. The people
Well,
of her
could
district.
that go into the point of that in a recent survey over 60% of New York City residents overall want the hell out of there.
Yeah,
Remember 20 years ago everyone wanted to move in
New
with
York
Giuliani
has
maybe
full.
30 years ago.
Yeah, New York has fallen apart. It is going through the same thing that San Francisco is going through, that Los Angeles is going through, that Oregon and Washington State are going through. The liberal leaders of these areas have caused deterioration. And I have said this going back to when we were on terrestrial radio. This is what happens when you do not have a strong two-party system in an area. Doesn't matter which side it is, left or right. When you do not have an opposition party that has the power to hold people accountable, this is what happens.
And that's why I blame you for getting her ass thrown out. Just kidding.
Yes.
It was a team effort. Trust me. Yeah, and that goes into what Trump said. Again, people obviously want to create some controversy, but he says that Jews who vote Democratic basically hate their religion. You might find that over the top. I don't, or at least
I
have
I
no
I
clue.
I think it is overstated, but not by
Of
much.
course it is.
It's
Exactly.
it's
Any Jew, no, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, fine, I got it. Any
right.
Jew, of course, and especially a Jewish intelligentsia, okay, is a moron.
It is
And you're voting
absolute.
for your own demise, genius.
It is absolutely inconceivable how Jews can support an increasingly anti-Semitic Democratic Party. And we're seeing more and more. We are seeing large groups of Democratic primary voters withhold votes from Joe Biden specifically because he is supporting Israel and he is kowtowing to them.
Of course he is.
We just talked about Schumer kowtowing to the left wing of the party with his comments about Netanyahu.
Okay,
And
but I need to stop. We need to stop for a second there. Biden doing it is one thing. I think it's even a lower level of sewage for the self-proclaimed, protector of the Jew and Joe Jew himself to sink to that level, beyond reproach.
yeah, but you know what? Schumer was never the champion of Israel that he claims
He
to
said he
be.
was.
He said he was, but he has never. If you take a look at his voting record, if you take a look at his comments, he's never been outwardly critical of Israel before, but he's never been a big champion. To be perfectly honest, there has not been a champion for Israel in Washington since Trump lost the presidency. And before Trump got into the presidency, there hadn't been a champion of Israel since Joe Lieberman retired.
Are you talking about the Senate?
Yes.
Because I would say that, yeah, I would say that essentially we have a situation where, again, the Jews who claim that they're the geniuses of the world and went to Ivy League schools, it's always been the Republicans that have been the supporter of Israel, going back to many, many years ago. You had Jimmy Carter, hated Israel. Ronald Reagan, supporter of Israel. We don't have to go down the list, but the boy geniuses should kind of wake up and smell the coffee and get your shit together. How does
But
that
it's
sound?
but it's
Uh,
gotten so much worse in recent years, starting with Obama, because
yes,
Carter was not a fan of Israel, but he did a damn good job getting Israel and Egypt together for peace talks.
no
Clinton
doubt.
Clinton also worked his butt off to try to get peace for Israel.
Can I
Obama?
interject one thing? I got to
Go ahead.
interject one thing. And as everyone piles on Israel and talks about how they're this, that, and the other thing, who was the one that walked away? Could you please fill me in, Dr. Eric E. Lopkin? Who was the asshole that walked away from an amazing, great deal?
Time and time
It,
again, the Palestinians, whether it was
thank
Hamas
you.
or the PLO, they have backed
Yasser
away from
Arafat.
the peace process, and
There you go.
primarily they refuse to uh, allow a two-state situation, which is what all of these allegedly pro-Palestinian groups are pushing for. But they have refused to accept a two-state solution because they want nothing more than the eradication of Israel. They do not want Jews living next to them.
And now we do on the topic, as we leave the topic of self hating Jews, we give the top award, the top self hating Jew, to Jonathan Glazer at the Oscars. That he basically gave an acceptance speech where he talked about how he wanted to denounce his Judaism and how Judaism and the Holocaust, I'm sorry, is being leveraged for Israel to oppress the Palestinians. Thank God he got over 450 condemnations from 450 Jewish groups. This guy is a piece of shit. I wouldn't see him do a friggin' McDonald's commercial. What a
No,
piece of shit.
there is a good possibility that he will never work in Hollywood again.
Thank you,
And
God.
to
There is
give
a God.
a little follow up, the open letter that you are referring to with 450 signatures, after it went public, got an additional 500 signatures. So
Fantastic.
you are talking about almost 1,000 people standing up against
Thank God.
anti-Semitism. And there's more going on because the Directors Guild of America has just approved a provisional diversity committee to protect Jews in Hollywood, and not just protect them, but also to fight against anti-Semitism and to fight against the rumors and innuendo that Jews were in control of Hollywood. They are trying to set the record straight and protect Jews from persecution and anti-Semitism. So with the Directors Guild of America doing this, quite frankly, it's probably only a matter of time for the Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild to join them.
Well, I would just do one even better. I don't know who the guy is, Jonathan Glazer. I don't know if he's rich. I hope he's not, because I hope he's relegated to saying welcome to Walmart, and that's the end of his miserable piece of shit life.
Well,
Put that
remember,
in your pipe and smoke it. There you go.
it wouldn't be Welcome to Walmart. Remember, his movie won for best foreign film. So he may be working in whatever country he's living in, but
Yugoslavia, I hope.
his Hollywood career could be at an end.
Oh, I may not be able to get to sleep tonight. I'm going to be crying me a river.
Yeah, don't you
Um,
just feel so sorry for him?
yeah, really. I wish I could just shake his hand personally and then punch
And
him in the mouth. There you go.
you know what? Before we move on from this, I actually want to give a particular shout out to the actress Deborah Messing. Deborah Messing has been very vocal in her defense of Israel since the October 7th attack. She has been under constant fire from people on social media. She has not backed down. She was one of the
Good.
originators behind this letter that got the 1,000 signatures. Yeah, thank God we have people like her out there.
And unfortunately, we have shitheads like Bernie Sanders and Chucky Schumer that are still roaming around spewing their bullshit for their own political gains. There you go. It's called the Tale of Two Cities. How do you like that?
Yes.
And then we move on again to the political realm of things. You know what's really interesting? Even seeing, no, it's MSNBC. Basically, believe it or not, take a deep breath. We're saying that Uncle Joe has to run the table with all the swing states because basically Nevada, Georgia, and Arizona are basically at this particular point in time, obviously anything can change, are firmly in the Trump camp. Uncle Joe's in deep shit. You know that? I know he cry me a river. I hope he can get to sleep tonight. But Uncle Joe, his campaign leaked, which is bullshit, that Uncle Joe is anxious to get out there and duke it out. Even though he was on that porch, I don't know if you saw this, and I don't know if our listeners saw this, that they started basically pushing people away because they didn't want him to answer any questions. And then he was in an indoor event, and he started answering questions, and he started playing music. You can't make it up. It's a bad B movie.
No,
But anyway,
it
your
is
thoughts.
it is ridiculous, but it goes back to what we were talking about over the last several weeks. Yes, behind closed doors, he's anxious to get
Yeah, he's
out
a
there.
genius.
Behind closed
Hmm.
doors, he's the second coming. Behind closed doors, he's going to single-handedly stop the immigrants. All these things behind closed doors. Open those doors and he does nothing. He can barely function. He has he was at one speech the other day where he literally in the middle just wandered off and started wandering into the audience, into the crowd.
Okay, but it's really interesting because you're a very strategically oriented person. That's what you essentially do in your consulting work. How do you package that? I mean, can you really put that aside for another 8 months? Because it's getting so bad. I mean, he literally, if you saw these videos, he's on a porch. They basically push people away. He was in the middle of, I mean, the guy cannot function. Can you bottle that up when there's no COVID? That
And
is a quintessential question. It
they
just is.
they can't bottle it up, and that's why you're seeing so many people in the media who have been defending him for the last 4 years start questioning whether or not he can win. In fact, over the weekend, and part of the problem, let me back up a little. Part of the problem is that the Democrats backed themselves into a corner because they severely overestimated one, the abilities of Kamala Harris, and two, the abilities of their lawfare to take Trump out of the election. So now you have Biden, who is, in all fairness, I don't think any of them expected Biden one to run a second time. Even Biden himself during the 2020 campaign was talking about himself as a transitional candidate and the fact that he would only serve one term. They expected to be able to put Kamala Harris in. Well, Kamala Harris is less popular than Biden is. And
And less intelligent.
she's more
Yes.
incompetent without the physical and mental drawbacks. So
There you go.
they can't allow. And in fact, the Washington Post this past weekend had an editorial saying how Kamala Harris needs to step aside for the good of the Democratic Party. You have we long talked about the night of the long knives. The knives are out. They know that Biden and Harris are debilitating to the party at this point. And
Okay, but this
unfortunately,
brings up the
there's
huge
nothing they
question,
can do
though.
about it.
I got all of that. But how? This is the key, and this is the key. Handicap it. Because the only thing they got, let's cut the shit, is the legal warfare. It looks like Fannie Willis, that thing's kind of blowing up. Not so sure after the Dementia Joe testimony with the files if that's got legs. I'm really looking at Stormy Daniels is probably possibly the only one. And the other thing is about how about the the bond, half a billion bond. Where is the New York bar? Do they have any scruples, or are they like Chucky
Well,
Schumer?
the New
They're
York
just so infatuated.
The New York
Go
bar
ahead.
has nothing to do with it. The bond issue is actually New York state law that you cannot appeal before putting this bond up. Now, this law,
Okay, but a half
one,
a
one,
billion.
yeah, well, this law, one, I firmly believe is unconstitutional, and I hope when all is said and done, Trump actually challenges the law in federal court. But two, was never meant to be used for a bond this big because the case in point was the law that Letitia James used was never meant to be used this way. This should never have happened. So that is the big problem with the bond. As for Stormy Daniels' case,
But it's
I
unconstitutional on the Eighth Amendment over undue harsh
yes,
punishment. And
yes,
so,
but
where is the? How come it doesn't go to the Supreme Court?
because somebody has to file the court case and
Well,
nobody ever
where's the
has.
geniuses?
That the only person right now that would have standing to file that case is Donald Trump. And quite frankly, he may be discussing this, but if he does get around to doing it, it's going to take him a while because he's got his plate full.
Well, I think he better start eating on that plate because this is a huge situation, and he should get competent legal team to get their ass in gear and do this because it's total bullshit. And let's cut the shit. That's the only weapons the Democratic Party has. I think Fannie Willis, a judge or a jurisdiction, just gave Trump and his lawyers the right to appeal her being on the case. I think that's blowing up. And what do you think of the documents case, Dr. Lopkin? I'm not so sure that's not in the dumpster fire. I mean, how do you actually prosecute that case when you had Uncle Joe?
Yeah,
And then what came out, I don't see that. I don't see that happening.
the documents case is falling apart.
On
They may be able to go through with it, but I honestly don't believe they'll be able to get a guilty verdict. The Stormy Daniels case in New York, if Bragg has half a brain, this will go
he does
away
not.
because it has already been delayed because the federal government just provided both Bragg and Trump with a trove of documents that the federal government had because they already investigated this and refused to prosecute, saying there was nothing there. Now,
Okay, let
Trump,
me interject one thing that's interesting about that too is that Bragg, the boy genius, engaged in this prosecution without really any documents to support it.
all right,
That's
he
what this
did.
beyond the federal government not pursuing it. He also went ahead with this with no documentation to support what he was going to do.
He went ahead
Genius.
without the documentation, and at least one of the charges that Bragg is trying to nail Trump on is beyond the statute of limitations. And New York State literally changed the law so that the statute of limitations would not have expired. But the law itself expires basically immediately after the Trump case. So they are manipulating the laws to be able to prosecute him. None of this
Okay,
could stand up in federal court on appeals.
okay, but it's also yes, it's ridiculous because also you can't post grandfather a law. Okay,
Right.
hello, genius. You can't do that. And also, I agree with Mr. Wonderful from Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank. New York was already bleeding more people than a stuffed pig, okay? And now, if you're any kind of business, would you ever, please help me out, Dr. Eric E. Lopkin, would you ever locate to New York? I
Well,
think not Forrest Gump.
it's not even a matter
Never.
of businesses locating to New York. That
Leaving.
that has come and gone already. You have businesses leaving New York, but more than that, you have hedge funds, you have venture capitalists who have already said they're not even going to invest in any businesses that are in New York. The risk has become too great that the liberal leadership of New York will, for no reason other than they don't like you, go after you criminally. So they're losing investments. They are losing businesses. They are losing people. It is absolutely plausible at this point that New York, unless they literally get rid of everybody in leadership, may not be able to recover from this death spiral.
Oh, I think may is not, that's not even a word that should be bantered. It will not. I mean, again, it was already expensive, but it had its cachets.
Yes.
And those cachets are gone, like gone, as Mel Allen used to say, for those that are old enough to know that. Yes, it's over, dude. There's nothing. And by the way, for my college class, they were going to New York, to Wall Street. Not my class, but the department, right? And guess what? Do you know what the rules are, Dr. Eric E. Lopkin?
What are
They
the
can't get off
rules?
the bus. They
Oh,
cannot get off the bus. No, this is America. They can just go to the presentation. They cannot walk around Wall Street. They cannot walk around New because of the legal,
yeah, the liability to
the
the college
liability.
would be tremendous if anything
Yes,
happened to
because
them.
that's welcome to the United States, the what, Empire City? Yeah. You can't
Yeah,
even get off a bus as a college student, I should say,
well,
and walk around New York City.
we are
There you go.
talking about a city that right now crime is so bad that the National Guard has been sent into the subway to attempt to stop crime there. And with the National Guard present, two people in the last week and a half, I believe, have been shot in the subway.
Yes. Well, I think if I think if Sinatra was alive, I think his encore would not be New York, New York. We'll just leave it at that. At this point, his encore might be Bridgeport, Bridgeport. Probably better situation. Anyway, we also have the corrupt media, and this was great because it blew up in their faces. We'll just say that the bloodbath comment. Your take
Yeah,
on that?
if
By the way, it did blow up. By the way,
yes, it did.
completely blew up.
For anybody who is not familiar with what actually happened and only heard about it through mainstream media, Trump was giving a speech and he was talking about how he will, if elected, protect the American automotive industry because they have been under siege. And if he is not elected, the industry could be facing a bloodbath.
Which is
Be-
true.
yes, this is all true. Well, mainstream media took the quote, if I am not elected, there will be a bloodbath. Took out the completely took out the context of the automotive industry about what he was talking about, and they said this is proof that he's going to be an absolute dictator. He's threatening vengeance. None of this was true. It was a
Of
complete
course not.
lie made up by the media. And what was
Yep.
really hysterical was when Tucker Carlson put together a montage of all
Yes,
of the uses of the word bloodbath in the liberal media,
it was hysterical.
showing them for the hypocrites that they are. Trump
Now, Dr. Lopkin,
never threatened
we
to.
depend on your analysis. What are the repercussions? One thing in terms, do you think it We need to really nail this down. Do you think it blew up in the media's traditional media's face? Yes or no?
It did blow up in their face because they did
There you
not
go.
expect so many outlets to carry the news about it. They were expecting blowback from Fox News, and they could go, oh, well, they're right wing, idiots. They don't matter. Of course, they don't agree with us. But media across the world picked up on this and showcased them for the biased idiocy that they were trying to put forward. And it blew up in their face. Their credibility is was at an
Is zero.
all-time low to begin with, but it is now sinking faster.
It's sinking faster than the Titanic. How do you like that analogy? There you go, Dr. Lopkin. And you know what's really interesting? CNN is basically bleeding ratings, bleeding money, bleeding revenue. And I love the clip. I don't know who it was, Bill Johnson, who cares? One of their, ace anchors looking into the camera, looking in, straight faced about the outrage of blood. And then Donna Bash, who I'd have to say I know some light bulbs that are brighter than her, looking like a moron into the camera while someone was talking about their outrage on the bloodbath. And the other guy that I think is a complete idiot, just because he's getting some, well, yes, to say romantic action from his now wife, is Morning Joe. What a moron! That used to be an actually somewhat interesting show. He was a Republican. That ship left the station a long time ago, but he was one of that's outraged. Just your thoughts. I'll shut up.
Well, honestly, I think the whole reason that the mainstream media picked up on the bloodbath comment and spun it the way they did, well, first of all, they know that Biden is treading water. He's sinking
Barely.
fast. They're trying to rescue him. But even more than that, I think they were depending on a bump from the State of the Union to be
Yes.
able to talk about how dynamic Joe Biden is and how great the Democrats' chances are this year. And Biden blew that in 20 hours. The polls came out, he got no bump, which I believe is actually the first time any president in any party has not received a bump from the State of the Union address.
Well, doesn't
So,
it go to like Obama's comment that never underestimate Joe's
yeah,
ability to F things up and leave it to Uncle Joe, the only one you could have a squirrel do the State of the Union and eat nuts in front of 100 million people, and they'd say, "Well, that's a nice, isn't it a cute squirrel?" And the
yes,
squirrel, secret squirrel, whatever his name would be or her name would be, would get a 5 point bump. Am I not correct?
that's basically the case. Yes, I think the mainstream media was depending on still being able to talk about the State of the Union. But when that blew up, they desperately grabbed onto anything they could, and that became the bloodbath comment, which was completely taken out of context. And this is not the first time they've taken Trump's comments out of context. They did it in 2020. They did it in 2016. But now
They always
the
do it.
the viewing public is on to their tricks.
That is correct.
They see the truth. They're getting their news from other outlets, and they can, what really did them in was the fact that anybody could have gone on to YouTube and seen the entire speech. You
And that's
could,
what people are doing, though.
yes,
And they're so stupid because they're not particularly bright. And they're still living back in the 1980s when the information wasn't out there. And they're so effing stupid, they think it's still that way. And guess what, boy genius? It's not. And I want your opinion on another thing because I think this is very critical. I think, and it was not a good month for Uncle Joe, I think it's even worse than what you're saying because I think the bloodbath comment obviously is centered on Detroit and Michigan. So when it's actually further spun and further and more times being dedicated to it, people in the key state of Michigan are saying, "Oh, he said that. Oh, I think he's right. Oh my God, I think it
Yes,
actually helped Trump." How do you like that one?
it probably did help Trump. And you're seeing more and more of this. You're seeing the media pundits or person I don't even want to say pundits, media personalities that are so
Morons, yes.
desperate to hold on to their woke viewpoint, but their viewers are getting smarter. They are seeing that what they're saying is not necessarily true. And in fact, just yesterday, this cracked me up. Um, Christine Ford, the woman who accused Brett Kavanaugh of raping her,
Yep.
has a book deal, and she was on The View touting her book, and a large percentage of the audience did not applaud when she came out. And Joy Behar literally yelled at the audience for not applauding and not supporting this brave woman. It's like even the
Yep.
audience of The View is realizing the pile of shit that they've been shoveling.
Yeah, it's when the view's not applauding, you've kind of who said that? When it's like a famous thing when you've lost. Oh yes, when Johnson said, "When you've lost Cronkite, we've lost the war." When you've lost the view, you've lost the media landscape. I think that's fair to say. And the view is a bastion of wokeism. It looks like Unilever is getting rid of Ben and Jerry's again. Maybe
Yeah.
being woke isn't the thing to do. Again, we're talking about self-hating Jews. Yes.
Yeah, Unilever announced they are going to combine all of their ice cream businesses. They actually own 5 of the top 10 ice cream brands, including Ben and Jerry's and Breyers. They're going to combine it into a new company and spin it off. And there has been talk from within the company that they're doing this for two reasons. One, the ice cream business is not adding a lot to their bottom line. So it's no big deal if they see
Baselines.
it go.
There you go.
But the bigger reason is they are tired of being dragged down by Ben and Jerry shooting their mouths off. The company Ben and Jerry has its own independent board of directors, separate from Unilever's. And Unilever's board of directors is tired of the woke bullshit that the Ben and Jerry's board is pushing. And they finally said, enough is enough. We're
It ain't
getting
worth
rid
the
of
shit.
you. Yeah, we're getting
There
rid
you go.
of you.
Excellent. Couldn't be happier. I'll never eat that piece of shit ice cream in a million years. Again, I think it would be great if they had a class action suit by some smart law group to sue these pieces of shit just to f them over for diabetes and obesity. That would be awesome. I'd love that. Anyway, we also have it's leaked, which is a bunch of BS, that Uncle Joe is anxious, really anxious to get out there, and he's just pissed off at his staff for not letting the tiger out of the cage. If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you. There you go. What do you think of that, Dr.
No,
Lopkin?
actually, I find that completely believable.
I don't.
I don't think Joe Biden has any concept of his own weaknesses. He does not see the incoherence. He does not see what the rest of us see. So, yes, I'm sure that he thinks he's at the top of his fighting form. He wants to get out there, he wants to take it to Trump. And his staff is holding him back because they know every time he opens his mouth, it gets worse.
And let me ask your opinion because I think that's more than critical in this situation. Isn't he kind of in a lose lose situation? He's got his poll numbers suck, you know what? and he's basically has to run the Rust Belt table in order to have any chance. And that's a fact. That's not my opinion. So he's got to get out there, and it's a catch 22 because the more he's out there, the more people said, yikes, this guy's out of his effing mind.
Yeah,
Or he doesn't
again,
even have a mind. There is no mind to be out of.
again, the Democrats backed themselves into a corner with Kamala Harris because they thought they were going to be able to pull Biden out after 4 years and Harris would step up. But
Mm-hmm.
Harris would lose to if, and there have been
Worse.
polls to show this. Harris loses to Trump worse than Biden does.
And so does Newsom, by the way.
Yes.
That's a
So
fact.
the only path left for the Democratic Party is to leave Joe Biden in there. And in fact, going back to what I just said about Joe Biden not understanding his own limitations, now that Joe Biden actually has enough delegates to clinch the nomination, as he gets more delegates, the Democratic Party cannot simply remove him. He has to voluntarily step down and release those delegates. Now, the Democrats could turn out the super delegates at the convention and say, well, we're throwing our votes behind XYZ candidate. But given that XYZ candidate wasn't even in the primaries, how are the Democratic voters going to feel about the Democrats putting up a candidate that they didn't even get a chance to vote for?
And plus, is not Miss Harris African American?
Right.
They're bleeding African Americans right now. That ain't gonna play in Peoria, Pasadena. I
Pe-
forgot the name of. Well, anyway,
Peoria.
Peoria. There you
Yes.
go. Now I want to keep speaking of the ridiculous. Let's wrap up with the ridiculous, and that is a New York. And I have no idea why they're putting together, why they would put together such a video, but maybe you can help me out. They did a video presentation on the deep state. First of all, claiming that it doesn't exist, and then in the same breath talking about the wonders of the deep state and how these are just regular, you know, Joe and Jane. They like playing pinochle. One of them actually saved the Earth because they did the calculations to push the asteroid off its course. And in the end, you kind of should be thanking the deep state for all the pleasures that you have in this great country. I
Well,
have no idea what they were smoking.
this is uh, an indication of where the Democrats and the liberals in specific are heading, because they're now trying to convince you that yes, the government is there to back you up. The government is there to protect you. And in
And
fact,
they're so competent.
the Supreme Court heard arguments in the case about the Biden administration colluding with social media, and Justice Ketanji Brown actually said that the First Amendment would be hamstringing the government. And we can't have that because there are times that the government needs to do this. She was literally saying that the First Amendment of freedom of speech was going to work against the government, and we can't have that. Missing the entire point that it is supposed to hamstring the government. It is supposed to hold the government back from overreach. That's the point of the Bill of Rights.
May I go out on a limb, please, Dr. Lopkin? And I'm just going to throw a wild ass theory out is that she was always been and currently is a DEI hire.
Oh, I don't think there's any question about that.
No,
She
yes, of course.
the the only decision I think she's gotten right was the 9-0 decision the Supreme Court handed down saying Colorado couldn't remove Trump from the ballot. And honestly, I'm not convinced that she didn't vote for that simply because everybody else did, and she would look like a
Exactly.
radical left wing
That's
wacko if she
the
fought it.
only reason, and that's what she is. And I'm sure when Ted Cruz asked for her what LSAT scores, it wasn't really readily available. I could only imagine. But that's welcome to America 2024.
Well, I mean,
Well,
you
an-
have to
go ahead.
remember that prior to her being nominated, the big Democratic nominee for the Supreme Court was Merrick Garland. And we've seen how incompetent he is.
A poster boy of moron. How does
Yes.
that sound? And he's a crying little wussy boy too. Cry me a river, pussy boy. Anyway, that concludes another edition of Carnivore Bites. A great show. I thoroughly enjoyed it, Dr. Eric E. Lopkin, and talk to our listeners how they can contribute to our fine show.
We'd love to hear from you. Go to the Carnivore Radio Facebook page, message us there. You can also go to xvadio.com/connect. Let us know what you're thinking. And of course, you can catch every episode of Carnivore Bites at xvadio.com, the Carnivore Radio website, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech.
Thank you, Dr. Eric E. Lopkin. See you next week.
We'll see you then.